Welcome to Brand for Good, the show for purpose-driven leaders who want to build timeless brands and create sustainable impact. I'm Lorraine Sugart, former PR and marketing executive turned founder of the disruptive agency Prosper for Purpose. I've worked with some of the world's most beloved brands, and I'm here to help you elevate your brand identity, visibility, influence, and impact. Are you ready to brand for good? Let's go. Welcome back to Brand for Good. Today, my guest is Beth Salyers. She is the founder and CEO of Custom Learning Atelier, an alternative learning and development company for impact-driven leaders, knowledge workers, and I love that term, artists and their organization. Beth positions herself as a learning redesigner in her field. Today, we're going to talk about what this means and how her approach to learning and development contributes to a more equitable, meaningful, and interconnected world. So my first guest for Brand for Good is Beth Salyers. Welcome, Beth. How are you today?
I am great. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you. We kind of corresponded through LinkedIn and some other ways, and I love the posts that you make, and kind of your online voice is very clear. And so I reached out to you and said, hey, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? And here we are.
And I was floored because that's something that when you operate in a place of impact, everyone's always like, what's your brand voice? How are you putting it out there? What are you doing? And then, you're really here to do the work, right? And then there's this whole comms part and marketing part. And so for you to say that I have a nice, strong voice, one of my coaches will be very happy to hear that.
That's good. I love it. I love it so much. So, Beth, tell us a little bit about how you ended up in New Orleans and started your business. I'm really curious about that.
Okay, so it's a fantastic story. I don't know if I'd say it was a fantastic story during, but it ended up being the perfect route. I was actually living in one of my home states, Ohio, where you live, my now ex-boyfriend, and things ended. And I had approximately an hour and a half to kind of scoop up my things and leave. I worked remotely there too. So I was very lucky in the fact that I could go somewhere else and not be in that space and continue working and whatnot. So my dad lives there in Columbus, and he was about an hour and a half away. I was like, hey, we broke up. Can you come pick me up? I have fabulous family and friends, period.
That's
so
great.
I had that hour and a half. I was like, I need to pack up a couple suitcases, I guess, and leave. And so I texted my sister who's in Charlotte, North Carolina. I said, hey, Kate, we broke up. My dad's coming to pick me up. I'm flying to North Carolina tomorrow. She's like, I got you. I'll tell the family. Send me your flight information.
Oh, that's so great.
Talk about biggest hug ever, right? I'm so lucky. And so that's what happened. I left that town, went to Texas, spent the night, hung out with him, and I flew to North Carolina the next day. My sister picked me, went to my mama's house, and stayed there for a month. I had work to do. I had clients and projects. I considered my home state, from to middle school, high school, and all my college work. You just need to be around your girls and your friends, and when you're navigating something like that. And so I was like, well, I've already lived in North Carolina in multiple cities. I love it. And my brother and sister-in-law live here in New Orleans, and they had for quite a while. And so I was like, let me go down and chill with them for a month, take my laptop, work. I'll be in New Orleans for a month. It's going to be great. And so I bought a ticket. And while I was down here, the end of August, between that, birthday happened in the beginning of November or October. I was offered a job in DC. I turned it down, and I was talking with my sister-in-law, and she literally quoted a line from Eye of the Tiger, like the Survivor song.
Yeah.
And I was like, did you just quote Eye of the Tiger? She's like, yeah. And I was like, you're right. Don't give up on the dreams of the past. And it was something to that effect. And I was like, you're right. I'm staying in New Orleans. That was it.
Wow.
I stayed with them for 2 months, found this apartment, and moved here this November. My ex was nice enough to put all my stuff in a pod and send it. I turned over my car title to all the things, and that was it. And so then I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I had this lingering desire for a business that I had poked around it previously in different iterations, but had never super committed to it. And so January 2020, I started the business that I have now.
We all know what happened in 2020.
Right.
Uh,
Mine was looking in the back. But of course, like I'd already built my work and my connections around the fields that I touch remotely. So that,
right.
that stayed. And so that was it. And I always knew, like somewhere like 2016, 2017, I stumbled on the first edition of the handbook and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like I'd never an intention to start a business. That's not my formally trained background or anything. But I was like, man, if I ever did, this just seems better. This, this just seems, I don't know if it has all the answers, but it just seems like it'd be better if we could all do it. And so when it came time to build this company, I was like, all right, let's build it using the Beat Impact Assessment, hooked up with Carolina Miranda and her company, Cultivating Capital, and was like, how do I do this? And then, oof, a company that's a certified B Corp.
I love it. I love it so much. So tell us a little bit about the company you started and who you serve.
Yeah. So I started a company, and I like to say, not just because we're in our 4th year right now, but it does feel kind of like our company name is Custom Learning Atelier, and Atelier is French for workshop, because very much our approach and how we work with people, and that everything is customized. Like sometimes people come up to us and they're like, oh, do you have this off the shelf? Do you have a ready to go? Like, and we're like, we don't. That's not what we do. There's plenty of people who do that and they do it well, but that's not us. Internally call it CLA for short. It's a little wordy, but really it feels like we're on CLA 4.0, which I think is a natural evolution of being a solopreneur and then working towards being an entrepreneur and growing something, bigger than yourself. So here today, what we do is we are an alternative L&D company for impact-driven leaders, knowledge workers, artists, and their organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done a lot. We're pretty much the internal team that I get to work with. We're pretty nerdy. And so we spend a lot of time running reports and talking to people and doing research. And we're formally trained researchers at a doctoral level. And so what we found in our conversations is that people interested specifically in the impact driven community, right?
Mm-hmm.
People want to make an impact. They want to provide their employees and their clients and their partners and customers with experiences, right? And they want to help people engage with what they're doing. And we know that with the rise of remote work and distributed work and the burnout, it was the silent resignation.
Yeah, right.
Engagement rates are really low across the board at work. We have employee activism rising, which is super awesome to see. But all these do add to how do you engage with the people in your organizations. Remember, these are impact companies. Like this is already people who are like, let's do good for the world.
Right.
People well. And so when I was starting to ask people and they'd be like, hey, can you help me do this and this and this? I was like, yeah. Let's hop on a call and figure out what it is. And we were working kind of in that dialogical manner, which I loved, but it's not really helpful for growing your business beyond just physically handle yourself. And then also to your point before, it was really, we did things all over the place because we have a lot of different capabilities and skill sets and interests. But over the course of I'd say the last 8 months has been a really intentional study of what do we really want to do? Why do we want to do it? Who do we want to serve and for what aim? And so using our research skills and getting nerdy about it and showing up in community, we found that when we asked people what they wanted to learn and what they wanted learning to feel like, most people were like, I want it to feel better. And I don't know what I want to learn. I just know I want to have better career development. I want to have work-life blend balance, better. I want something to feel different in my organization, especially if they're leaders, especially as they're growing.
Right. A lot of these leaders, business owners themselves, or are they leaders with more like entrepreneurs?
Oh, some of them are business leaders themselves. And so great question. So a lot of the folks that we're working with are impact-driven leaders. So work across industries. We like to say you just can't be an act, right? Hopefully you're not, and you can't be actively, contributing to extractive practices and all that. And so that's why we really focus on hanging out with B Corp folks and B Corp like-minded folks, 1% for the planet, impact-driven spaces. And what we found is that, especially as the impact-driven space is growing, we're doing business differently, intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an element of lack of formality that some of our other corporate entities have. I have good friends who are gigantic global companies. And when they go for a promotion to their professional, it's very block by block by block. Like, oh, I'm at this level. I'm going to go to this level. I have to knock off these steps, etc. And we're finding in the impact-driven space, because we want to engage with our colleagues differently, that system does not exist. So then how do we intentionally design programs within impact-driven spaces that really center humans and they center the individuals, and they're not just after increasing learning engagement for the company itself, but also for the human being and their own personal and professional skills. So we've worked really hard over the last couple of months and came up with 4 different offers that were perfect timing, that we're rolling out.
That's great.
I was like, well, this timing is cool. Half of March, and then launching fully as we start the month of April.
So I know that you do you'll go into a company and do what you call an internal learning audit. Is that typically your first step? And then I'm relating it to what I do, right? Because that's what everyone does to make things more accessible. But, like you're doing a learning audit, we do a communications audit, right? Like, what are all the ways that you're talking about yourself, all the places, things like that. And then from there, you plan, and then you implement and measure is typically how we do it. But you have a little bit, at least for now, of a different structure. Can you kind of walk us through, like, if someone comes to you and says that they want to bring your skill set into the business that they own, what would that look like?
Great question. And likewise, we start with an internal learning audit, because when we think about learning and growth, and we often are unable to pinpoint ourselves on a map. And I think that in the learning development space, especially with all the various contexts going on in the world right now, it can be nice to know where you are and where you're not. And so when a company engages us at that level, we start with the internal learning audit. And that is, for most companies, would be about a 4-week process. So week 1, we go in and we do interviews with leadership and with the team who has been selected to participate in it. We also do document review, because a lot, especially if you're an impact-driven business, you have that within your SOPs, right? Here's how we address learning, here's how we take care of our employees. And so we take week 1, and then we use that data and we create custom surveys to then send out to everyone in the company and figure out specific where are people along the lines of, here's what we want, here's what we're seeing, here's how it feels to learning in this company. And we take a survey approach just to kind of get a big overall picture, so you can start drawing that map of what does learning look like and feel like in your company right now. And then we go into that, like, analysis, etc. Week 3, we then go into a deep, we bring team members in working on the audit, the design work, etc. And we produce a couple things. In addition to summaries of overall findings of interviews, document reviews, and surveys, we also start with creating a diagram where on the right, we have summarized as, here's what people are saying they experience. And this is all an aggregate. This is all anonymous. Here's what we have them experiencing regarding learning within your organization. And on the left-hand side of that Venn diagram, we have, here's what was stated was planned in your documents. And never, I would be wholly surprised if anyone had a complete circle overlap, because it's not the way that incremental change, continuous learning works. So it's normal and natural, and you should have a true Venn diagram where you have these other things that you've planned out, and then you have what's experienced. And then in the middle, of course, we identify, okay, what is overlapping? What have you hit the mark on? Where are you hitting with what you say you want to do and you've set up, and what folks are experiencing? We then give basic recommendations of what to do next based upon all that data that we've taken in. And then we also come up with next best steps. We find that same with, a lot of things. If you just throw a whole bunch of ideas at someone, it feels really good in the moment and you feel like, I've got this. These are great ideas. I'm going to run with it. And then, of course, get back to your desk and you're like, the phone starts ringing, notifications pop up, meetings start happening. It's just one more thing that feels like an overwhelm to that plate. And so that's when we also say, if you want help doing this, we also have an internal learning map and trail. And that is a way more in-depth process, but still approximately 4 weeks. And we go into nitty-gritties. We do additional interviews, internal document reviews, social media account reviews, because as you know, in the communication space, it's a powerful way of that we're teaching others and we're teaching ourselves internally, right? More questionnaires and questionnaires specifically. And questionnaires typically are not meant to be put in aggregate. We're doing this because we are truly going to try and work to meet people where they are and come up with whatever number emerges learner profiles within that company.
So this is like if someone would hire an executive coach to come in and work with their team, but you're doing it from the perspective of looking at aligning with the values that B Corp espouses, which would be around stakeholder engagement, stakeholder value over shareholder value, the values of inclusivity, and using business as a force for good. Is that correct?
Yes. And we don't say, you don't have to be a B Corp. You don't even have to want to be a B Corp certification, but it those lines of, we consider ourselves like human rights centered and inquiry driven. You are here for climate justice. You are here for inclusive stakeholder circular economy. You are here for racial equity. It's through those lens. And so we kind of take all that data and we take these values that are shared, but also those that we've learned that are unique to the people in the company and the company itself. And we also then take a contextualized look. Often we find that people design learning isolation, but right now we've got 4 generations in the workplace, almost 5. Some industries are experiencing almost 5 generations in a workplace. We have climate change, inflation, cost of living, burnout, multiple wars and conflicts, command and control management still dominates.
Yes.
Power, racism, toxic masculinity. We did a pilot with some folks involved in film, production, etc. And that is coming up a lot. Worker activism, technology, the rate at which things change. And we use that as a map. Like we put that out on the terrain because we want to make sure that whatever we design is cognizant and responsive to what's happening in the world. And then we figure out what people want to learn. And for instance, maybe 5 topics kind of come up and 4 learner profiles emerge. That's just all emergent data that we do the analysis for. And then from there, we go into here's what the terrain looks like. Here's what people want to learn. And here are some trails, literally a scope and sequence of how you can help get these various learner groups from position A to position B to position C.
So many questions are coming up for me right now because I'm trying to just see how all of this works in my mind. So if the owner of the company didn't bring you in, say it was a larger company, would you be brought in through HR, I imagine, maybe through if they have an officer on sustainability, or who would initially reach out to you? Or if you're letting people know about your services, who would you reach out to?
It's funny, most people, they put us into an HR category, but we found that unless it's an HR category in a smaller business that also has overreach into, also has, dual responsibilities along with even marketing, communications, etc. A lot of what some HR directors are tasked with is a lot of compliance. And we can help with compliance stuff, but it has to also be built into the larger context of what folks are doing. So to answer your question, actually, it could be anyone as long as they have domain to make decisions on how people experience their work. So we've been approached and worked with people who are CEOs and they have, command of that. We've been approached and worked with people who are head of their division. We've been approached and worked with folks who lead a cross-functional team on a specific project because
Interesting. Yeah.
right? Especially in those, this was really interesting because it's one thing in a traditional business structure, you have a marketing department, right? Okay, well,
Right.
the marketing department probably has like a similar baseline amount of information, right? And you speak language and all that kind of. When we have these cross-functional teams, which is increasing more and more, and on top of that, with most knowledge workers these days, they're remote. They could literally be halfway around the world. They could literally have a different first language and time difference than you. So how does it work with engaging learning and getting people to be more agenic in their own career development and in the projects at hand when you have all these variables floating around? So I would say roughly estimate, it's usually leaders of the company or somewhere, high up decision-making power. If it's a small to medium-sized business, if it's a larger organization, it's usually those folks who are heading up cross-functional teams.
Got it. So, what does your team look like? Do you have people that you bring in depending on kind of the direction of the project, or what does that look like?
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly the size of the business we're at. We are at a level where we hire folks in as contractors. They are amazing human beings. Like I said before, I have amazing friends and family, and I've been in the teaching and learning space now for 25 years.
Yeah. You were a
Uh,
teacher before you started your business at one point, correct?
yeah, I started out of college as a classroom teacher, middle school English language arts, and I did that for 7 years before I went back and got my Ph.D. because I needed to make a decision at that point. I could feel the dissonance between the promise of education and the reality of education for my students. And it
Yes.
was gnawing at me, like to the point where I actually got like physically ill and was told by a doctor I need to find a new career. And that's
Interesting.
a lot to take in. And so I was like, okay, do I then go find a totally new career, or do I go try to learn what's happening and make a difference? And I chose, let's put language to these forces. Let's do the research. Let's engage and see what I can do to make a difference. It just dawned on me, like, I really believe in the folks that I get to partner with
Yeah.
in the company and that work with is organized learning is one of the most powerful human design forces on the planet. It's been used.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could not agree more. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, is this a program that could have application in colleges and maybe even high schools? Like, how far back could this methodology go? Obviously, being adapted for the audiences, but there's so much conversation about kind of redesigning learning, but you're actually doing it. Now, you're doing it on a professional scale, but are there wider applications for this? And are you thinking about that?
Yes, 100%. I am. Some of our clients and the people we work with right now engaged in PK-12 education or higher ed or out of school time spaces. And then the majority of our work is with corporate folks. But we actually internally have kind of a rule for ourselves that we want to make sure that a certain percentage of our clientele is directly tapped into the PK-12 and higher ed space, because for all the conversation happening right now around the future of work and all of the ongoing complexities in public education in this country,
Hmm.
the fact that those two groups do not and talk together is shocking because I've been on both sides.
Right.
And if you look back at like the original purpose of schooling in the United States is to prepare people for the workforce.
Hmm.
So obviously all of that is changing, but we're still educating folks for a workforce that, 100 years from now. And then we have workforce leaders saying we have to reskill people when they come out of college, or they're not great at creativity, or they're not really great at collaborating, or how do they learn how to speak up? All these things. And they're coming into these businesses with, as digital natives. And so the fact that there's such a distance between the two actually like breaks my heart.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you the sole reason why when I first started the business and people were like, they knew my background and they're like, are you going to stick with primarily like PK-12, et cetera, or business? Because been doing consulting with various businesses, organizations, associations, NGOs, like at that level for quite some time. They're like, which route are you going to go? And I was like, I don't think I can choose because they're too connected. And I said, I'm going to put the most energy into building up business with companies because I live in the United States and it is a capitalistic society where businesses run so much of what we experience in daily life. So if
Right.
you want to impact how people experience learning from birth to death in all the iterations of their life, you need business on board. Whether I like that or not is beside the point. That's just how, from what I've seen and experienced, that's where the greatest amount of influence and power comes from. So that's where I want to engage.
This is such a great conversation. I love this. I know that you're in development for kind of your next iteration of what the company is going to look like, what you're going to offer. I think you should come back in 6 months to a year and tell us what's going on at that point. I think it's really fascinating. I thought I was going to be a school teacher. I chose a college that was known for its teaching program and
Mhm.
did a pivot in my second year and moved over to journalism and PR. And I have no real regrets and I teach in my own way. But this is really fascinating to me. I think that being able to help people learn how to think about business differently and how to use some of the tools, like you said, even if they don't want to become a certified B Corp, is just really amazing. And because we're in B Corp month at the time of this
And
recording, it is March. I would love to ask you to take our last couple of minutes and just talk about, you did a little bit in the beginning. So instead of asking you why you became a B Corp, talk for a minute about what it means to you to be a certified B Corp business.
indeed, well, happy B Corp month to you. Uh, it's super exciting time. I love that question because I'll be the first person to say, we don't need a world full of B Corps. We need a world full of businesses doing it better. And what it means for me to be a B Corp is that doing business better is really hard because it's not the norm. And there's not a ton of examples flooding your world at any given moment. And for me, it's important to be a B Corp because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do it better because, of course, I've been conditioned of what business as usual looks like, feels like, and how it operates. And so for me, it's so important to be part of the B Corp community, live in it. One, it's hard and you need reminders and you need support and you need suggestions on how to stay on the journey, how to do it better.
Right.
Questions come up. You're not spinning it in your own head, but you can say, hey, Lorraine, I got this question. Can you help me out with this? Or Carolina or Flip or all these people who are so generous with their experience and their
Yes.
friendship and their support. I'm really overwhelmed by it because this is hard work. It's hard work anyways to start anything, any project, let alone a business. And then to try to do it differently than the status quo wants to permit. We can't do this alone. Like this is a team sport and it is one of the most generous groups of humans I've ever been a part of. And even when people are in the same industry and have the same target market, it's not competitive. It's how can I help you? What have you learned? What have you tried? And it's just a different way of doing things. And as a learning nerd, I know that wanting to do something different and trying it a couple times is not going to change behavior or habit.
Right.
We continually be engaged in that unlearning learning. And so for me, the B Corp community provides that as we try to do things differently in our own company.
That's great, Beth. So tell people where they can find you and learn more about your offerings.
Yeah. So on customlearningatelier.com, and then my name under my Beth Salyers on LinkedIn. And we also have company pages on LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok.
Ooh, TikTok. Okay, that's great. Well, Beth, we will have those links in the show notes to your social profiles as well as your website. And I want to thank you so much for being my first guest on our newly named podcast, Brand for Good. It's been really great talking with you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you. Me too. Thank you so much, Lorraine. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks. And to everyone else, I will see you next week on Brand for Good. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Brand for Good show. If you like what you heard, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and leave a review so other purpose-driven leaders can find this valuable content. To learn more about building a brand for good, please visit prosperforpurpose.com for more resources and information on all the ways you can work with us.